Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Urena and I'll be interviewing Neptune today. We're going to find about Neptune and everything that makes up this beautiful being who has chosen to be the host of these series of interviews. It's my honor to be the interviewer. Welcome, Neptune. I have a
Hi, Urena. Thank you so much for doing this. It's funny to be on the storytelling side of things now. So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm just really
yeah,
excited. So, thanks so much for doing this.
absolutely. It's my pleasure. Okay, so let's just jump right in and talk about what a separate self is. Can you tell me what your experience has been and give me an example?
Okay. Um, so the way I see it at this moment, because I think it's always changing, I even wrote notes about what a separate self is, and I just kept coming up with all sorts of different ideas, but because there's lots of ways to look at it. But the way I see it is that, we're this pure self, which is neutral. It feels nothing either way. We're just this pure consciousness. And basically, a separate self is when we step out of that neutrality, when we start feeling some sort of a reaction to something or somebody. And that reaction can be some sort of a judgment. It could be a feeling. I just know there's sort of, at this point while I'm living here on earth, there's like these two parts. There's like this higher part, which is always watching, always looking, and then there's these layers that I can be looking through a lens. So, maybe 10, 20 years ago, there were lots and lots of layers, and I was seeing more through these selves. And now at this point, I've cleared away a lot. So I'm much better at, I know the moment I'm reacting that it's like, there's a self. I can see that. So, and I'm becoming much less attached to it. It's like, well, it happens. Like it's normal. This is what happens on Earth. Um, so the way, if I could, there's so many different selves, and it's kind of hard to sort of give them particular labels. But I think you can take sort of, if, like what Shakespeare said about, the world's a stage and we are but the players. Like, if you just look at all the different roles that people play, there are so many of them. Even just, the jobs we do, like becoming identified with that. So, the role might be like a bully, or, like I'm an angry person, or, I'm the nurse or whatever. There's so many possible roles that we can take on board. And the one the one that I'm sort of thought I might say is sort of like this pair, and it's like that classic, the knight in shining armor, the one that wants to rush in and save the other person, and that played out a lot with me in life. Where, yeah, I was trying to save everybody around me, and people who didn't, would just did not want me to touch them or to save them. Like, yeah, I was especially trying to save those ones most of all, and it was just a waste of time. And then on the other end of that, there's like the knight in shining armor. There's also, believe it or not, there's like a princess in me, and that princess, she wanted to be saved, and I was waiting for someone to come along and save me from just this crazy world that I've become a part of. So, um, that's the example of, because also separate cells are dualistic, so they tend to come in pairs. So you find that, yeah, so the one that wants to save, and then, yeah, the one who wants to be saved, like, that's a classic pair. So I thought I'd present it that way. So that's my example.
That's a great example. Do you find that there's always something underneath that role or separate self? There's always something driving that self, and then you go down one more layer and find another separate self
Oh,
until, yeah. And then you can actually pare it down to the ultimate, the expression of the ego. The ego doesn't mind creating, numerous separate selves. It always wants to have something that it can direct our attention away from what you had pointed to, our pure essence, our pure being, and create this sense of, well, I exist separate from the truth of who we know ourselves to be, right? The purity of who we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Okay. Well, at this point in time, I am 55 years old. So I've been on this planet for about 55 years. And I think it's important to sort of, nothing's really going to make sense unless I explain that, that reincarnation is real, that I've been here on this planet before. I've been other places too, but I don't think that's sort of relevant to this. But nothing to me makes sense about being here on Earth unless we accept that, we've been around before, because how else can you explain how you've got children, within a family, and brother and sister, they're just totally different, and it's got nothing to do with the nature or the nurture. There's already an existing psychology. So that's sort of the first thing I wanted to say. And also, yeah, that also that I'm an avatar, which is, and I've come to accept this, is that I came here from another planet. And it sounds, it might sound sort of kooky or weird or something like that, but it's just something I've come to accept about myself. And I remember when I was about 10 or 11 years old, we had this girl at the school who, she was clearly autistic now that I look back at it, and she used to run around the playground screaming her head off, and she'd scream out, "Get me off this planet." And I remember sort of all the other girls, they were actually, I could see that they were teasing her so that she would do this, so that she would have a huge tantrum, and so she would scream that, and they thought it was hilarious. And I remember just thinking, I didn't think it was that funny, and it didn't surprise me either. There was nothing weird about her wanting to get off the planet, and I actually felt that too. I felt like I want to get out of this place too, like it's too much. But the lesson for me at that point was kind of like, well, I've got two choices. Either I can succumb to this feeling of, oh, I want to get out of here and I want to escape, because I just knew I would be sent to a special school if I did that sort of thing, or I can learn how to assimilate. And so I chose to assimilate as best I could. And notwithstanding that I'm still a bit of an oddball, but I learned how to be here on Earth. So my life started out, I was adopted out into a family which I'd say is a really, really lovely family, where the mother, my mother really, really wanted to have a child, and, the family just welcomed me up. I've got 6 biological brothers and an adopted sister also. We're not related by blood, but we're related by soul. And we landed in, the best family you could go into, the one where we were going to be loved. But within me, there was always this part of me that was, the trauma of adoption, it really affected me. And I could feel that my birth mother didn't want to let me go. So it was a very difficult thing to deal with, because on one hand, I was happy in my family, but there was just a whole section, a whole chunk of my life which I couldn't really express to anyone how I was feeling, that I didn't, that I wanted to know my birth mother. And the funny thing is I lived all my life until about maybe 8-10 years ago, when out of the blue, I did try to find her, but I had no luck. And um, my biological siblings found me, and it was like everything just sort of came together again. And it's like it's weird to sort of tell the stories, because like there's a linear progression in life, but then also it's like there's this spherical experience where something from the past comes into the present, and so time sort of disappears. And the story of when I first met my biological sister Christine was, I drove all the way to Melbourne. I just got my bus and I drove all the way to Melbourne, and I got out of my bus and we just hugged, like there was no tomorrow. And then we got chatting and life, talking away. And a few hours later, she just goes, "Oh my God, Nep, you're not going to believe this, but my watch has just stopped at exactly the time when we hugged." And she said our mother, she couldn't wear analog watches because they would stop. Like, she has quite a strong energy. And we realized, oh, our mother's here. And I love the beauty of it is that time stood still in that moment. So
How sweet.
yeah.
Beautiful. Have you thought about what your whole journey has been and the lesson for you as an incarnated being, as a soul, what your opportunity was to experience being adopted out and coming into a family that is loving, and then reuniting with your birth family?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing is like, before many of us come here, we formulate a divine plan. We make our choices on how, the experiences we want to have in order to help us face our psychology and deal with things that have not been resolved yet. So I can see, I very much do not see that it was something that happened to me any longer. Like, I can see I chose this, and I'd say it was probably the major experience of it was facing, that sense of being abandoned. So I had this very extreme sort of parallel of, this sense of being abandoned by the mother, but then also being welcomed as well. So I received sort of both. So there was something in me which felt, ultimately, I can see I felt separated from heaven, from God, from I felt very alone here on this planet. So I think that's what the ultimate goal of this journey has been, was to realize that, it was about finding that connection back in myself once again.
Yeah. It's so interesting how we each have, it's a similar lesson. We each have a different narrative about the separation from our source, separation from God, separation from Divine Mother, and our journey to come back into wholeness. And it's a beautiful, tragic when we're experiencing the separation, when we feel we've been abandoned, when we feel that complete loss of the security of ourselves and the divine. And and in retrospect, we can see the beauty of how it's played out. But while we're in it, it's painful as hell, right? Yeah. So this is really interesting, and how you shared your experience. It shows me how much the teachings of the Ascended Masters have really shaped your perspective, and how they have helped to shift, rather, your perspective on your life. So whereas perhaps earlier you saw it through a different lens, a different separate self, you've been able to understand more deeply the bigger picture, and perhaps your personal journey. All right. Can you say more about how you chose your spiritual path and what led you? Because I remember you saying that even at 10, you had that sense, like, get me off this planet. When did you actually come into your spiritual path?
Yeah, well, that's good, because I'm sort of like bang on at that point. So when I was sort of around that age again, maybe 11 or 12 years of age, and I would have described myself as a bit on the spectrum, like a little bit Asperger's, and I feel like I've transcended that a lot, and I don't want to focus on that in this interview. But I just sort of experienced life a bit different to the girls around me, where I went to an all-girls school. And I remember my sister telling me, I know it's weird that I'm laughing, but my sister told me that this other girl, that her father had died of a heart attack in the shower in their house. And my sister told me, and I was like, oh no, that's not true. Like, I didn't believe it. And so I remember going like straight up to this girl and just going, is it true? And just blah, 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 blah. And I just asked her, and then she's broken down in tears. And I felt awful that I'd upset her like that. And I remember, at this point, I realized I wasn't feeling empathy. And because I knew it was insensitive, and I could see that in retrospect. So I basically just made this decision, and this is at about the age of 11 or 12. So I made this very conscious decision that I want to understand what suffering is. I want to understand what abuse is. And I sort of thought, and I formulated this idea that, that meant I would go out into the world and help people who were suffering and to help people who have been abused. But the funny thing is that I was really, ultimately wanting to discover it for myself. So I ended up going into a whole bunch of situations and scenarios where I did experience all of the trauma that caused me to suffer, and I'm talking for a long time. So I'd gone from having a really lovely, easy life, all wrapped up in cotton wool and protected, to, spiritually making this decision and this obviously was my divine plan, that I wanted to go in and just dive into the experience of trauma. But also highlighting that, there was a self there was a separate self that was wanting to fix it for everybody else, to save everybody else from their suffering. But ultimately, I had to get to the core of my own. So,
right.
Journey sort of moves on. So I basically, I felt attracted to women sexually. Like, that was sort of another aspect. It's not something I really want to focus on massively, but this homosexual identity that followed me through life, the same-sex attraction, and I explored that. And also I drank a lot, and I smoked a lot of pot as well. Like, I did a whole bunch of things which were really like just dropping me into this descent of not seeing as clearly and harming myself, and it was almost like I was punishing myself, and that was disconnecting me from the light of God, of my I am presence. That light was being cut off through my choices, and because I was just harming myself so much. And I was choosing people who treated me badly. I can't tell you even why. Like, that, I was treated so well as a child, but this is where I just know that reincarnation explains it all, because I was patterned into choosing people who treated me very, very poorly, and even allowing evil, into my life. And so I went into teaching, and I ended up gravitating to a school that's for children with emotional and behavioural disabilities. So this really, really appealed to me, because that was me wanting to be the saviour and to help these children. And a lot of them were on the spectrum: Asperger's, ADHD, conduct disorder, street kids, you name it. Like, it was hard, a really, really hard job. It took a lot of patience and determination too, because most teachers would come along and just leave within 6 months, because it was just being told to fuck off every single day and being treated really badly. Like, yeah, it takes its toll on you.
Yeah.
And this school was actually run by people who I know full well were fallen beings. And for anyone who doesn't know what a fallen being is, or the reference I'm making, it's basically, you could say, like psychopaths, people who have no sense of humanity in them. But there was something in me that I so desperately wanted to change these people. I could see, I can see that everyone has a beautiful light within themselves. That's what I do with the children. I could see their light, and they might put all of these behaviours towards me. They might have spat in my face, but I'll keep looking at their light until, not all of them, but most of them would eventually see it. They'd see their own light because I wouldn't let go of holding that vision for them. But I was doing it with these people also. So when I started at the school, a teacher had just been killed, months before I started there, and the whole place had just fallen apart. The teacher wasn't killed by students, but it was by a situation where the kids were all acting out, and a person in the public was involved, and that person happened to have a knife in his hand at that moment, and just one stab straight to the aorta. And this young man, who was only 21 years old, he died. And I could see, and I came to understand, I could see, like, it reflected back on these principals of the school. They put him into an unsafe situation without full training and without the proper support for very, very difficult children. Like, it's not an easy job. And so the compassionate part of me, like, understood, and like anyone else in the world, anyone with humanity in them, like, they make a horrendous error like that where someone's life is long. Like, the vast majority of us, we learn from it. We learn from the mistake we've made. And these people, it took me a long time to see it, but they kept putting us into dangerous situations. Like, within a couple of weeks of me starting there, I was put into a situation where an autistic boy, I didn't know how to deal with him. He was freaking out, and he attacked me, and I was just blood from top to bottom with this child attacking me. And it was on them. They'd put me into situations, and they kept doing it time and time again. So this played out for a long time. It took its toll, and I was unable to deal with it. I just went through submitting to being treated very poorly, and then not doing anything to help myself by drinking lots. And I just got sick. I developed a brain tumor on my pituitary gland, and I think that's pretty much because I was cutting off the light, my spiritual source of light. And that's where the crown chakra is, where the light comes in. And that affected me very, very severely. But then once it was diagnosed, I realized, that was my big opportunity again. So it was like this big revolutionary shift where all of a sudden, I just had this big chance to step back into life, and I felt great. Life really, really changed. But the effects of it, live with me to this day. It caused a lot of damage. So I've got a very sensitive endocrine system. So, yeah, and I took off and I left the school, but then I got drawn back into the school again after that. And I basically fell into the same patterns again, which was to slightly differently. But, yeah, I just fell into the same patterns of being around these people and still trying to sort of, I'd go through, I was more fighting them a lot more at this point. I wasn't sort of submitting so much, and I chose like a very dark relationship. I really wanted to experience sex, and so I ended up in a relationship where there was a lot of sex, but it was yeah, she was not a very nice person, not much light. And but I got what I wished for, that was the journey. And eventually everything culminated to the point where it just all hit a head where I couldn't take any more of it, and I hit this point where I realized where I was near death, and near death on every level of my soul, where I just had nothing left more to um, nothing left to give. And so I realized I had to leave Sydney. I had to get out of there. And this was like the true beginning of, my spiritual revolution, where I began the path. And on that path, like, a whole bunch happened. But I about maybe a year and a half after leaving the school, like, I was still smoking pot and everything. But then I experienced a massive psychosis, where that was pretty much because I had a whole bunch of trauma that I could not deal with, you know what I mean? Like, so I was just, dancing along, smoking joints, forgetting about, all the problems, but all of this psychological trauma was just sitting there, like, it was like vomiting. It was just this mental, psychological vomit where I just went totally off with the fairies, and I was out of control. And I can honestly say that when someone is in a psychosis, and I saw this on both sides, when a child was in a psychosis, but then experiencing it for myself, that person has no control. They're totally at the mercy of discarnate entities controlling them. Yeah.
Well, they're completely dysregulated. Their nervous system, your brain, and I think it's the effects of living under so much stress and the trauma that you experience. Do you find that, we have choices at every step, and it seems like even at a young age you made a conscious choice to experience something, and it went in a dark, direction. No right or wrong, bad or good. It's just the experience was very intense, and you have a lot of like material to work with from that experience. Do you find that you could have chosen another path, and do you find that the experience that you had reflects a deeper lesson or opportunity for your soul? There's something there for your soul to, that you've needed to learn, or be reminded of. Sometimes when we have trauma, it's there to remind us of something that we have not resolved at a deep soul level. And yes, the experience in and of itself is horrible. But when we step back, we can go, wow, I really get that I had to experience that. It was horrible, but then it brought up something so much deeper. And perhaps this is a lifetime that we've had to be reminded of that, so that we can consciously go through it, process through it, and release it. And so where are you with that? And what have you seen for yourself?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I can see that all of these traumatic experiences, they happened in order to draw out my primal self, which is like this is like the king of all the selves. It's the one that is overlaying everything, and it stems back. It's massive trauma, and basically this self would react to all of the situations where people are behaving in really appalling ways. And this self had so many different ways of trying to sort of not deal with it, but at the whole time I couldn't accept free will. I couldn't accept that people can do whatever they want with no consequences. It was something, and because I couldn't accept that, so I was either trying to change I've tried to change other people. I have fought them. I've defended them. I've submitted to them. I've done everything possible, but nothing changes. And I've never been able to accept that free will. And because of that, like, it's like I've been feeding that, feeding my light to these beings, because by fighting it, by resisting it, by submitting to it, it's buying into it. And the funny thing is with those fallen beings at the school, when I finally left the school, about a year later, I just felt this really big impulse to walk back into the school, and I was feeling so much better. And I felt to give them the Ho'oponopono, which is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. It just was just something like, Spirit just said, do this. And, I was able to look them straight in the eye with I was so innocent and pure in doing it, like, basically saying, yeah, I fucked up too, like, and I remember I sort of gave these kookaburra feathers, and these two fallen beings, they were like, they looked and they just sort of threw the feathers away, like, it was a rejection. But I was okay with that. I was absolutely fine with it. And you know what? And the whole time I was there, I kept thinking, when is karma going to catch up with these people? I just couldn't understand why, what they were doing wasn't going to catch up with them. Within a few months of me doing that, these people, they were exposed. The children went to their parents and just told them a bunch of things that they were doing that, were just not, that were just, yeah, they'd been doing all of this all the time. So they lost the school. They were not allowed to teach there anymore. They were not allowed to teach under any circumstance. They lost their accreditation. They both lost their marriages too. They lost everything. It was like the whole of their karma just went and got them. And you know what? I can see that I was feeding my light to these beings all of that time, and the moment I cut off my light and said, no more. But I didn't really. At first, there was sort of anger when I left the school. I felt a lot of anger. But when I went back in there, it was just, I was so pure, and I'd let go of all of it. So, yeah, I cut off. I cut off the source of that light.
Mm-hmm.
Been through a whole bunch. Oh, sorry, darling. You were going to say.
So I find it really interesting that what I see is, we're given this impulse to do something. We may not see the bigger picture. We may not see the deeper meaning to it. And perhaps it was through your presence giving them an opportunity to change their ways, to turn a new leaf. And instead of turning a new leaf, accepting that feather, they threw it away, thus saying to the universe, to their own presence, I refuse to change. So let it all come.
And also, I had no attachment to what their response to that would be. That was the key part. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So so what I can see is, and then I just went through life with, just continuing on my journey, and eventually I found Kim's teachings, the teachings that come through Kim, and they helped me to really, really accelerate and to come to this point of understanding, like, about this primal trauma, about this primal self, and to start to see. And I hit a point about a year and a half ago where it all came together, where I was in a situation with someone who I built a close friendship with, and that friend, and it was coming from, ultimately, like, I can see that my primal self was sort of trying to control her. It was trying to sort of change, because I could see the mistakes she was making in her thinking, and I kept, like, she was a bit obsessed with conspiracy theories, and this self was sort of always trying to be like, oh, but what about this, and try and look that way, and just seeing, like, how it wasn't helping her, or any other choices she was making. And eventually her frustration spilled out, and in a way where she just released so much aggression towards me. And it was, it was really upsetting to deal with, have, to be yelled at and screamed at and have, such violent abuse directed towards me, and really what I'd say was unfair sort of behavior. But I realized that she can do whatever she wants to do. And I realized I had to sort of let go of this desire that, she should apologize for the way she'd behaved, or that she should change in any way. I realized, like, no one else has to change themselves on my timeline, and no one else has to change themselves according to what I see that they should be behaving like. Like, I've got to let go. I've just got to let go and accept the free will that anyone has that right to go through whatever experience, no matter whether it seems good or bad, because if it seems good or bad, right or wrong, then that's dualistic, and we're placing a judgment on it. So this is about just stepping back and accepting, like, yep, you have free will, and I pray that one day, you'll come back and you'll discover yourself. But it may not be even in this lifetime. Like, who knows when? It's because I've made mistakes. I've done stuff that I wasn't happy about in my life, but I'm made peace with that now. Like, it's like, well, but that's all a part of this bigger picture. Like, it's
Right.
and it's helped me to learn. So in her doing that, in her projecting in that sort of way aggressively, that's her stuff to learn, and she's got to process that at her own rate, at her own time. And it's not up to me to choose that. And it's her right to explore conspiracy theories until she's had enough of it. Like, who am I to say you can and you can't do that?
Exactly, right? Yeah, it's such a complex situation because it's all about the timing and what we were going through socially. But I think that you hit it on the head, is that she actually has a right to her beliefs. And who are we to play the devil's advocate? I mean, you can do that. You can say, hey, have you ever thought about something else? But if you see that someone is just will not let go, then for me anyway, that's the signal. Then why, if you really want to believe that, go right ahead. It's not up to us to try to change. And I think that you were talking about the primal self, and I'd like to go back to that. And first of all, to understand more about what a primal self is and how that primal self in you got activated in that moment, in that exchange with your friend. Is it the need to have someone be on the right side to believe the truth? What is that primal self for you?
The primal self desperately wanted, justice to happen. Like, and I went back into like a pattern, a reactionary pattern, where I hadn't smoked pot for years. I hadn't had a sexual relationship for years, but all of a sudden, all of that came back, just like that. It came back into my life, and I didn't want it. I didn't want to do that, but I did it anyway. And then all of it just left just like that too. Like, it just all collapsed because, I knew that's not the path here right now. But, so, as I began to, I went into the pain of the primal self, like it was awful. Like, I wanted to kill myself. I just, and this is only a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. And I remember sort of being on a beautiful beach, and, it's a beautiful sunny day and it's gorgeous and everything. And I'm there just thinking about how to kill myself. And I just, oh, fuck, this is like serious. And I knew, but one thing I was really clear on is I knew that it wasn't me who wanted to kill myself, really. I knew it was something outside of me that was making me think this. Like, it was like an entity that had got in. And so straight away I turned to Archangel Michael and Mother Mary's spiritual crisis toolkit. That's through Kim's teachings, and a lot of us have used this, and I just every day, every moment, like, I'd be doing the invocations to change this energy, because I knew this is serious. This is really, really serious, and I'm in a crisis, and so I just kept doing that, and eventually it all just alleviated. My power came back, and I was able to start seeing. Like, oh, this is about free will, and I felt like I'd sort of resolved it fully. I'd made peace with accepting, like, everybody has a right to behave in any way they want. But then I just went through a couple of experiences since then where I realized there was another aspect to this that I hadn't fully resolved. So there was the accepting free will, but then there was this other little element where I was doubting in myself, like, and so you remember there was. I'll just tell you about the most recent experience. And I'd gone into a small town, barely any people around at all, just a store and a pub, nothing much there. And I'd gone into the store, and I was just walking back down to Bubbles, and I could all of a sudden hear this, loud commotion. Someone was yelling, and I sort of ignored it. And then I just thought, eventually, it got my attention. I turned around to have a look, and this man was screaming at me like that. And I couldn't even tell you what he looked like. I didn't see this man even. He was so far away, and he's yelling, get the fuck out of this town. You're not welcome here. And it was just, he was screaming abuse. And my instant, in a sense, was, it's okay. It's just an entity in him that's yelling at me, like something about me disturbed him, and it's not personal. Like maybe he's on drugs, maybe schizophrenia, anything. I don't know. But then the next day I was walking around the town, and I'd already knew, my intuition told me this is nothing to do with me. But then all of a sudden I started questioning myself, and I started going, well, maybe I did this, or maybe I did that, and I started, and I realized it was just ridiculous for me to be questioning myself. So I was doubting in myself, and so what I discovered was that this is actually I'd been through a couple of experiences of saying, like, I was accepting free will, but something in me was doubting what that person, how they were expressing their free will towards me. So I was doubting in myself that somehow I'd caused them to behave that way, when really I haven't. But yeah, so that's sort of like, that's the balancing part to what I see is like the twin presentation of the primal self. So and I'm sort of, just at the point of sort of resolving it now. So I feel like it's just a matter of, I've basically said to the masters, to my I am presence, okay, well, there's only one way to know if I've done it, and that means, like, I've got to go through more experiences. And
exactly, right. Right.
So be careful what you ask for, but all I can do is, like, I've got to have that experience and experiment and see, like, is there a reaction in me, and to choose something higher. So that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I know that there's a trip coming up for you, so maybe it will be beautifully laid out for you, for you to see how much you have grown. Yeah. So thank you. I think that that's going to be it for our questions and our interview. Is there anything else that you would like to share with everyone? Something that you have gained from your time with the masters, something that has really kind of like a teaching or some wisdom that you actually lean on and that guides you in your life now?
Yeah, well, that's always changing. Like, I could answer that question totally different at any time, but right now the one is the one that's just coming to me in this moment. It's about, where I put my attention, and there was the Gautama teaching just recently, which is about, wherever we put our, that we always are adjusting our focus. Like, one moment I could hear a loud sound outside and my focus will go there. Right now my focus is here with you, very much with you, and it's also, it's above too. Like, it's so, I'm just very conscious of where I'm putting my attention, where my focus is going. That's what my current experience is. Like, if there's a reaction going on in me, am I going to focus on that reaction, or am I going to focus on rising above that and just seeing it as something separate, and that it's not really me who's doing that? So that's the current focus.
Beautiful display of owning your power and knowing that you have a choice. That's like a mastery, and then you're not being, pulled by these separate selves or pulled by your reactions or old patterns. That's powerful. Yeah. Mine is that I know that there's always more. I might be experiencing something right now, but I'm not limited to that. There's always more. And that gives me a lot of comfort. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and we will talk again.
Yeah. Thanks so much for holding space, Urena. I think, you've done an amazing job. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.